your ideal time to go to the physician to kind of talk about your fertility is certainly before then. The sooner the better, especially if you realize that you're having problems. So, what does that look like for a couple who's trying to conceive? So, typically, if you're over age 35 and you've tried in earnest for 6 months without success, you need to go see the specialist.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Wellness at the Speed of Light podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stefano Sinacropi. I'm very excited today to have Dr. Mya McCarthy on the program. It is very personal for me because she is a fertility expert. She's a very sought after physician for these. I have a ton of questions for her about everything. You guys that watch the show, but I'm really excited because as I was telling her before the show, my firstborn son was a product of just a wonderful OBGYN that we found that had helped us through, the fertility process. And my second one just kind of popped out as I was telling her before. It was just very unexpected because we had so much trouble with the first one, but I could tell you there was a lot of psychological angst for us and just this concept of not being able to have a child. I mean, I'm adopted myself, but we all have that instinct of wanting to have the child of our own, just to pass forward. And it's literally built into our DNA, into our genes. Otherwise, our species wouldn't continue if it was that way. But anyway, thank you so much for being on the program. I can't wait to pick your brain, your wisdom. I've seen some of the stuff you've done. So excited to have you.
Listen, it is my honor to be here with you today. And I'm excited to have this conversation too, because I feel like, we need to talk about this more. We need to highlight this so that people aren't feeling alone in this journey, right? So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times, people that listen to the show a lot, they know I'm all over. So usually I open the question by talking about American healthcare, and this and that. I'm going to do it a little bit differently today because I think the concept of fertility it's just so fascinating. So usually I don't like kind of go through, why'd you decide to do this and that, just because that is what is done on so many other shows. But in this case, I really need to know, was there a specific thing that happened like to you in medical school, or is it a personal thing? Is it just something about a friend, a family member? Why fertility? Why did you say, I'm going to make this my life's mission to help people to have that baby that they've always wanted?
Yeah, that it's a loaded question, but it's a very interesting one. And it really does serve as my why, my big why. So I am a pediatric hospitalist by trade. So, and my training is in that. And I've been in academic medicine for over 15 years now. So I'm used to that life. However, after coming out of medical school, residency training, etc., I was single at the time, and my OB said to me, listen, Mya, if you want to have a child, you're going to have to freeze your eggs, or you're going to have to look in a sperm catalog. And I was like, wait, what? I thought we were just here for a regular exam. Like, what are we talking about? And so I did the research, and I actually decided to harvest my eggs and freeze them. So that's what I did. I was 34 at the time, already kind of getting old, quote unquote, to do this type of procedure. And so that's when I actually learned that I had PCOS. I had not really paid attention to any signs and symptoms that I was having. And in hindsight, I was like, oh, yeah, definitely I had PCOS. So the yield from that particular harvest was not very large at all. Like on average, some women will harvest about 20 eggs or so, maybe a little bit less. I think from that cycle, I harvested 6. And so, and it was so interesting because as I was going through the process of egg harvesting, and you have to do stimulation, ovarian stimulation, There's so many, you're just really manipulating hormones at this point, and to get your eggs, your ovaries to produce more eggs. And so as I was going through that, they look at them periodically through ultrasound. And they kept telling me, oh, this is going to be great. You've got a lot of follicles. This is going to be excellent. So I went to sleep thinking, oh, this is going to be great. And I woke up and she's like, yeah, we only got 6. I'm like, girl, what? I just spent all of this money and all of this time. I only got 6. What's going on? So, and once I realized those follicles were empty, which actually does happen a lot with PCOS. You'll create follicles, but there's no egg in them. So, I put them on ice and went on about my life and met my husband. We got married. I told him straight up what the situation was when we first met. So he had, no qualms about anything. He was in the know. And then once we got married, we decided we'd do this again because we knew this was going to have to be our path. And so I went through the whole egg harvesting thing again. And this time only got, let's see, 3, only 3. Now, most physicians will cancel a retrieval if you only have 3. So, but our physician was a lifesaver, and he did it for us. And we were harvesting those 3 eggs, um, and here's my little one coming now. You may have to edit this piece out, but she is our miracle baby. She was conceived via IVF, and that is the reason why I decided to do this. Um, if it weren't for this technology, she wouldn't be here. And that's why I'm doing this, because I also decided, at the end of the journey, I was like, I am not going to let anyone go through this by themselves, um, because it's just I felt so isolated on the journey, so isolated. So that's the long story, but that's why the doctor's womb was created, to actually help other women walk this journey so they don't feel like they're by themselves.
That's a great story. Obviously, I didn't know that, about you. That's fab. And it's usually, that's one of the most fun things that I like, and just having conversations with experts like yourself. Your why, that's the whole book, like Simon Sinek, your why, finding your why. And after you telling me that story, I mean, honestly, people that find a physician like yourself that's gone through that yourself, that knows the fears and all that stuff. I mean, when you're yourself, you're also, kind of a survivor of the trauma of feeling like you might not have that miracle baby. You're going to have a completely different approach to how you do this thing. Can you talk a little bit about what was the lowest point that you were at when you were trying to do it? I mean, did you have a period where you were like in a true, like what you would say, depression, where you felt like you needed
Oh
like
yeah.
almost like help?
Oh, absolutely. So, throughout my medical training, like I felt like I'd always have a family. I feel like I'd always be a mom. But they tell us in medical school, this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, like I said, once I finished all of my training and found myself single, I was like, okay, but I do want to start a family. So what do I need to do about this? And so that's when I was telling you earlier, I harvested my eggs. And then when I got married, we went to the fertility specialist to start again. We started with one fertility specialist, and my husband had to go through different procedures. And after one of his procedures, we sat down in the doctor's office, and we were told, you will never have your own biological child. Never. And, we rarely say never in medicine, right? It's not an
Right.
absolute.
You never say never. We say, well, we don't know. It's not likely, but
Exactly.
let's keep trying.
Exactly. And so for someone to use that type of language with me, like never, it seemed like so final. And I remember whatever else she said that after that, I have no idea what she said because I started crying. I started boohooing and we crying, and we got in the car. I remember us getting home somehow, and I just got in the bed and didn't want to move. And that happened it was like that. Like I would get up just to go to work, but then still carrying that burden inside of me, knowing that everything that I dreamed of was just dashed in like a matter of 15, 20 minutes. And so I called my mom to kind of share this with her. And that's another thing about this. Like my parents' generation, IVF, unheard of. Yeah, they did not do this at all. And when I tried to explain to them what, we were trying to do, they were completely confused about it. But that's another topic. But either way, and I called my mom and I was just sobbing. She's like, I'm on my way. I'm on my way. And my friends came and we had wine, we had comfort food, just so I can kind of get through that the disappointment that I felt. And I did become depressed. I absolutely did. Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that. And it's interesting because it's like sometimes people, they don't understand that us as like physicians, we go through exactly what they go through. Obviously not in your way. You have like, you really have a bond with your patients, because when you tell them that, like, I'm a spine surgeon, I haven't had spine surgery, I've had other surgery, so at least I have a little bit of a bond, but I've certainly gone through, ups and downs, and you had that. But then also you trained at a high level as a physician. You were a pediatric hospitalist, which comes with its own, I mean, plenty of them are pretty burned out. Even though I will say that pediatricians, of like people that are in pediatrics, from all the physicians that I know and I interact with, are usually the nicest, most tolerant people for whatever reason. I don't know why it is. Maybe because they're just having to see all these heartbreaking stories. But if the whole medical complex was run by pediatricians, I think we would be better off. That's just an aside. I've always said that. That's just like a thing. Did
I
you agree
agree.
with
I
that? Like, why
agree.
is that? Like, why are pediatric doctors like nicer than, than the rest of us? I mean, ortho people are okay. I mean, we're okay. We're thought that way, but like pediatricians, like I never imagined myself saying something, like not inappropriate, but just saying something like, to question a pediatrician, I'm going to get my head ripped off. I can't say that
No.
about, some of my other colleagues, where even as a physician, I got to be careful about, breaching certain, things they don't want to talk about or something. So, but yeah, I mean, understanding that these like personal stories are so important, in
Yeah.
making the decision. So, you went through this, on your own. So you were practicing as a, you're practicing hospital medicine. How long did you do that? Like, what was that period of time? Like before you kind of jumped to do the full time.
So I actually still do practice as a hospitalist.
Oh, you
Yeah.
still do? Okay,
Yeah.
I thought because I didn't know if you had like completely switched, because a lot of
No.
people, when they see certain niches, they're like, I'm just going to do that. I've had OBGYNs that have left, and they just do integrative medicine. They're like, I can't do
Yeah.
it anymore. I'm burnt out. But there you go again, because like pediatricians, they're like, no, I'm just going to do this. I can still do this because I love it so much. The other docs are like, I'm out of here. I can't. Yeah.
Yeah, I still practice, and I do a lot of education work too with the School of Medicine
Mm.
that I'm affiliated with. So, but I still do, again, this is a passion of mine. It's a newfound passion, and I do a lot of advocacy around this as well. So right now, it's kind of a part-time thing, but we'll see. We'll see.
We need people, like you. I feel like when we were going through it with our fertility stuff, I was so busy in my practice, and I was a newer
Hmm.
doctor, and I was so stressed out about other stuff. I feel like I wasn't even there for a lot of the meetings, but I certainly was there
Hmm.
for her, and she was super, super stressed about it. And
Hmm.
honestly, again, we were like, when we found out that, she was like, I know that feeling. It's amazing. Now, we didn't go anywhere near, the trials and tribulations that you had to, having you went through the
Sure.
IVF process. We just did,
Yeah.
some medicines, and, to get things, kind of juiced up. So eventually I want to get into a little bit of the details about how the fertility process worked, because the truth is, a lot of like the people that listen to this show, we have a lot of female listeners. They're going to be very interested in this topic, and they never heard about it. So, I mean, I want to get into how the process works. Like, what do you do first? Then what do you do here? Then what do you do there? But before that, I just want to tie up kind of your story about like kind of coming through medicine and this and that. Now I go back to like some of my like the usual stuff. So while you were doing, your training, Did you, and I've had other guests on the show, and and I've asked them this, and I had a neurosurgeon who was like, I mean, she's like a super, rock star on social media. She has like 2 million followers, Betsy Grunch. And I got into this topic of training of physicians in medicine and hardships. And I ask everybody kind of their versions of stuff, is just because I will tell you, when I was doing my training, I saw some things, with some of the women that we're training with, that made it so hard. And I always used to think to myself,
Mhm.
it would be so hard if I was a woman trying to go through this process. And again, your specialty is a little bit different. Neurosurgery, there's a lot of hazing, there's all this other stuff. I'm an
Mhm.
orthopedic surgeon, there's plenty of hazing that goes on there, and we have all these
Mhm.
war stories. Did you feel like you struggled more because you're a woman, especially an African American, Black woman? It's not easy because people have their ideas of who is what. So people just look, you know what I mean? So either from a
Yeah.
training standpoint or from a patient standpoint, were there
Yeah.
struggles that you went through before that? I like to ask that because I love to listen to people's like struggles to see how they overcame them. That's the story. Look where you are now.
Mhm.
Like what'd you have to go through to get here?
Oh, yeah. So, as an African American person, we're already unicorns in the medical space. So, as an African American woman physician, absolutely, like, I don't know, super rare unicorn. And when I was in training, I, I was the only African American resident for quite some time, to the point where I remember one day I cut my hair. Like I was transitioning from having a perm to natural hair. And I cut it really, really short. Like one day it was long, next day they saw me, it was short. And I literally walked past people and people were like, "Where's Maya?" I'm like, I'm right here, y'all. I'm right here. I just cut my hair. I just cut my hair. And even my chairman invited me to his office. And I think he thought that I was like interviewing. I'm like, I'm one of your residents. So, it's that thing about not being seen in that space, although I was, clearly seen because I was the only. Um, and, particularly as a pediatrician, especially when it comes to, starting families, et cetera. When I was in private practice early on, I got a lot of questions from, I think they were well-meaning, but why don't you have a family? Why don't you have children? I mean, you take care of children all day. Don't you want children? I'm just getting those type of questions. I'm like, I'm just trying to take care of your child. Let's not talk about my uterus, okay? Let's keep her out of the conversation. And so that was hard. That was really hard. So first, I have even the struggle of being an African American medical student at a medical school who previously had not accepted many African American students at all. In my class, we had over 15 students that were accepted that were a minority, and they have not done that since. Not that many students at all since. To surviving that and then getting into residency where I was the only, and then now in private practice, now I'm being questioned about my ability to be a mother. Like I just felt like at one point it was coming from all sides, and I'm like, give me a break. I'm trying to get my training. I just want to, do well by these families and their children, and go on with my life. So yeah, it was incredibly difficult, incredibly difficult. But everything. This was worth having for me. And again, I have to go back to my why several times. Like, why am I even doing this? To ground myself and recenter, as far as why I wanted to do practice medicine, because you truly are married to medicine. Absolutely.
For people that are not interested in it, like engulfing and encapsulating your whole life, it's the wrong thing. There's nothing wrong with doing other things. And I understand there are a lot of people that want to be doctors, but they have to understand it's really not. I mean, you can make it quote unquote part-time, but when you're practicing certain things, you bring it home. And especially in the pediatric world, you see things as a pediatric hospitalist. I mean, there's heartbreaking things every day. You're not going to,
Yes.
go a day where you don't take that home. And that's one of the hardest things I talk about all the time. That's the biggest thing that I struggled with in my first 5 years in practice was this, oh my God, I'm consumed with this stuff. I like 24 hours a day. Sometimes I would wake up like just thinking about a patient or something that had happened. And it's like, unless you're a physician, you don't know what it's like to experience that. I mean, we all different specialties, but it's all the same thing because we're taking these people on as our family. And then we have to just deal with their burden. So it's not enough that we have us, our family, and all our chaos that goes on in our own lives, but then we have to deal with the things outside of it. One thing that I've never shared, but I think it's a good thing to share because you just shared that story. I've never shared it, and it is interesting. And I talk about it again a lot about perceptions and things have changed. When I started as a practicing physician, I can tell you that anytime I would start at a new hospital system, nobody thought that I was the doctor. They literally didn't think that doctor. Like you go in and you start talking to them, and this is, I mean, obviously people would say, oh, it's because you're young or whatever. People just say whatever, but that's not the biases that we have. And I'm not faulting anyone. It's just that's what it is, and we have to change things. But yeah, I just remember at this one hospital I was down. It was like my second or third day. I'm excited, like literally in practice, and they were getting stuff and they just wanted to know where I should put all the trays, like all the surgical trays and stuff. And like, they didn't even think. I'm like, and at that time was the times that I don't know. I'm kind of dressed as the surgeon, but you can't perceive that I'm the surgeon. So, it is really great to see how far, I mean, things haven't come as far as, people would like, but the dramatic impact, like if you look at females in medicine, unbelievable, strides. Unfortunately, if you look at the African-American, community, I had a neurosurgeon on, a Black neurosurgeon on, he was talking about it, that the amount of, like Black neurosurgical residents, sometimes it goes down, and you get these unicorns, but in general, at least the trajectory is positive. And I just think that it takes a very diverse, multicultural, you want people from all backgrounds and international people and everything. Why? Because that's what our population is. And again, everyone, it doesn't matter. Like I have a very specific background. Like I was adopted into an Italian family. I'm half white, half black, but I was adopted into an Italian family. So my first language wasn't even English. So I'm very different. So I have the experience of looking one way, being in a different type of family, having a certain kind of a name. So there's just like all these different, things. I'm trying to put it all together in my book that, that's coming out this year. But the truth is we need all of us because we have very different experiences because, right, your experience is different than my experience, is different than the next person's experience. And some people are comfortable with anybody. Right? People can't. Listen, I did my training in Louisville, Kentucky. There's some types that I love people in Louisville, but there's certain people that came in that whatever. But the truth is, if you are authentic and if you show that you care, even when they're wearing a swastika tattoo and I'm the doctor, after 5 minutes, they're totally comfortable. They're like, thank you, doc, whatever. And that's the humanity that we have to see in each other. So I'm really big on, because of my crazy background, I am so big on looking at a person's like soul and getting away from looking at their external appearance, because we know that makes no sense. That's about power and putting people in their place. It has nothing to do with anything that's real. And so just in talking to you for this, I'm sure that all of the, the people that you see are very comfortable with you, no matter what they are, no matter what their background is. But there are a subset of people. Well, maybe it's we have different. I'm also a male, and
Yeah.
that makes it a little bit different. And
Yes.
so it's just a different world. And some people are, but the reason that it's important, because people ask me this question all the time, the reason it's important to have people from all these backgrounds is because there are certain people, especially in our crazy medical world right now, that you just can't connect with them unless you've had some experiences. Like people don't,
Yes.
that is one thing, that there are certain people, like they don't get that. Yes, I'm not saying to make people, like, put people in places where they don't belong, but the truth is people do belong, but we need all of these different people, right? Because if
Mhm.
somebody doesn't have your experience, sometimes they're just not comfortable. So you can't connect with them.
That's what it is. The connection points. Yes.
Connection points. And so, for example, what I hear, because I get it. And again, because I have like a different background, and I've been exposed to like I was around all kinds of people growing up, like, Italians and people from everything, African Americans, Hispanic, everybody. So I'm very comfortable with everybody. So I know enough about like everybody's culture because I've kind of been in it. I've been in their homes. I've, broken bread with them. But I need to get that connection. And there's even people I can't connect with sometimes, even though
Hmm.
I have that background. There's people, I'm sure, like you shook your head
Hmm.
before. I'm sure there's people, you can't
Hmm.
connect with either. But in general, it's really important because, for example, like if you look at some of the urban communities, if you're not really from there, you may not be able to connect with them on that level to help them to manage their diabetes. I know for some
Hmm.
people, I know my audience, they know what I'm saying, but other people, they don't get that. They're like, well, no, they should just understand their diabetes is under control. Well, you got to
No.
connect with them with stories or talking about somebody's
Hmm.
grandma or this and that. It's everything is stories and connections,
Absolutely.
in what we do.
Yes, I mean, there's so many people that are distrustful of the health system, and a lot of that is rooted in history, and how
Mhm.
people were treated by the institution of medicine in the past. And so I'm here in the South, and
Yeah.
so the distrust is super high.
Yes.
But I was born and raised in the South. I
Yeah.
am a true Southern Belle
Yeah.
and Georgia peach, and so I get it. I get it. Why some of my parents come in, and I might give them a treatment plan, and they're like, I don't know, and so it's a lot to have to kind of overcome for parents and patients. And a lot of times, there'll be patients that come and because of cultural differences, they behave in a certain way, and it's not anything weird to them, but to someone else, it may be seen as offensive. And oftentimes I have to step in and mediate and kind of be that go between, and all is well. It's all good. So you know, and like you, I have walked into spaces where I can tell people were immediately uncomfortable because I was the doctor. I've walked in spaces in which I had my white coat on, my badge, all of it said doctor, and I introduced myself as
Yes.
doctor, and then it's like, oh, are you going to clean up this
Yeah.
this mess? Are you going to take out the trash? Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. We laugh about it. That I really preach this post thing. I'm very big into like humanity and looking at people's souls, and I'm very spiritual, and we got to get past that. It doesn't make sense because no matter who's talking like that, when people speak in a bigoted way or a patient says something or whatever, they think that I'm with them. I'm like, I'm going to be, I don't play into that because I'm like, no, no, no,
Hmm.
that's just the person. Just like we don't want to stigmatize people because they're African American or Hispanic or Asian or whatever. We also don't want to stigmatize people that have mental health issues or that
Right,
have this or that. And
right.
we put people in all these different boxes, and it's just a way of people feeling. So I know a lot of this like discomfort and stuff. So I'm not mad at people because now that I'm older, I don't get that as much, and I'm a lot more well known. But I'm not mad because I know people have preconceived notions and whatever, but
Hmm.
I do want to help people to get beyond those barriers because we have so many issues right now in American medicine that need dramatic changes. We are in an absolute mess right now, and I think having that human connection and having doctors like yourself that want to connect on that human level with people is what we do, because I know this because you're in fertility, so you have to be partners with the patient,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
you have to be partners. If you go in there as a fertility specialist, and you're the perfect person to say, and I just this just kind of came up, but one of the things I have is that we are still, if we want to really break through and break the cycle of chronic disease in our country and in other places in the West, we have to get away from this paternalistic thing. I'm the doctor. I went to this med school. I know better than you. And I'm going to tell you that's the opposite. You cannot connect with people like that. Obviously, in fertility, there's no chance. But in my specialty and in other more, kind of like things where we're just going to, oh, you're going to do a knee replacement, or you're going to do whatever. People just want to tell people, oh, you need to do this or whatever. Oh, you don't want to do that?
Yeah.
Forget it. I'm not going to treat you. That's the opposite. We are there to present options, to try to guide them in the right direction. But like, as we always say on this show, we want people to be CEOs of their own health and hire
Hmm.
Dr. McCarthy to be the top level manager of their fertility department.
That's
Okay. Or,
right.
or, or the womb. You're the womb department. They hire me because they want me to take care of their neck. So you're not hiring me to tell you how to live your life or to tell you got to get this injection or you got to do that. No, you're hiring me as that in that division to give my bet from everything that I know, to try to give my wisdom to you. And then we make a decision together, and I'm going to respect your choice. And if you want to do if you want to go to the Himalayas and meditate, or do you want to do whatever, I respect it. And I think maybe people going to the Himalayas and meditating is a good idea. So I might say, that's fine. But it's about respectfulness. And I know in your
Yes.
profession, like I know you're a partner. You have to be a partner to them
Yes.
because they just want somebody to like be with them on that journey. And you mentioned that before, so that's how it came up. You
Yeah.
see
No,
it, you
you're
see that
totally.
though. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean,
No,
and
you're
other people,
totally.
like, so I'm sure some of your colleagues, you're like, why are you talking to the patients like that?
Yes.
Right. So
Yes. Yes, and it's interesting, especially like in pediatrics. Like, come on, like you mentioned at the top of the show, we're usually a warm and fuzzy group.
yeah,
We're,
that's right.
we usually don't have these kind of conflicts, but we do, we still do, and this is what I teach my students too. Like, this is the art of medicine that you're not going to read about in a textbook,
Yes.
but you're going to learn from example and watching others do it. And, oftentimes my students say to me, Dr. Edie, you really handled that pretty well. I think I would have just been, frazzled and all over the place. And I was like, well, what I try to remember, a couple of things. Number one, when people are in the hospital, children, adults, but especially for children, they're in a very vulnerable place, and their parents feel like they cannot help. They can't do anything to help them. And so that puts people in a very different kind of space emotionally, mentally, all of that. And I can speak to that even more because I'm also a parent. I had a 25-week baby. So the child that we conceived via IVF, I had her at 25 weeks. And so we were at the beginning of the pandemic. So we were suddenly thrust into, okay, this NICU life in the middle of this life changing and devastating pandemic. Wow. I couldn't even make heads and tails of anything. And I had to transition into being the patient and the parent, instead of being the doctor. And that was a very unusual place for me to live, but I had to do it. And I understand it now on the other side. I understand my families a whole lot more, as they're going through their process, be it whether their child is in the hospital seeking treatment and care, or if they're on their own fertility journey. I get it. more than people think that I do. Yes, it's not, my formal specialty, but I get it at a level that, it's hard to really get to. Number one, I get it from a perspective of a physician. The medicine is the medicine is the medicine. I understand that. But I also get it because I'm a mom and I'm a woman who's been through infertility herself. So, I try to do the same thing, is to really just kind of share my wisdom, what I've seen that works, and integrate that with understanding the medicine in a way that people can grasp it and really understand it so that they can make the best decision for themselves as they move forward in their fertility journey. That's all that I really am trying to do to help families. And so far, I think I was talking about it the other day. I think we're on family number 14 that we've really helped to kind of usher in their new babies into the world. And it's been a pleasure to do it. It really has been a pleasure to do it.
As we transition into the fertility world, I just want to tie it into something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm talking about this stuff ad nauseum. Is, we've got this, and I talk about it more in the chronic disease thing, but lifestyle medicine has become a huge passion for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just as much of a lifestyle medicine physician, integrative health physician now as I am a spine surgeon. I mean, I'm into all these things, and I think we're helping a lot of people. So one of the things we talk about is how the American lifestyle has absolutely decimated our health, because medicine, we're sick care. We just 90% of the dollars we spend is on sick care. We're just treating, we're just reactive. And so that is a huge passion for me. But let's take it back to fertility. So questions that I have is the lifestyle when it comes mostly of the mom, because we get into dad, but do you feel like that one of the issues that is really hurting people as far as their fertility? I get, polycystic, it's very common. That's very common. But in general, our lifestyle choices of the American, like of the way we eat, like high sugar intake, high caloric intake, obesity rates very high. Still, I mean, even though smoking rates have come down, it's better. Obviously, alcoholism is going to contribute to, to infertility. But also, I'd like you to talk about like all lifestyle, but also toxins in our environment. Like how do microplastics, play into this whole thing? How does, I mean, is there any data whatsoever on 4G and 5G towers and infertility? Because I know I mean, that's one that, we talk about with like certain brain tumors and stuff. The data is so, but honestly, the position statements by those that are making this position are getting more and more ominous, where even I, like think about like having blockers for some of these different types of radiation. But the number one place where we're exposed to toxins is our processed foods. And this has been a lot, recently there's been a lot made of this stuff. So can you talk about how lifestyle impacts fertility rates, and then throw in the toxin thing, kind of at the end?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked me that question, because a lot of this I actually integrated into my own journey as I was, going through my infertility issues. So I didn't mention this, but the reason why I had my baby at 25 weeks was because of preeclampsia. And then I developed HELP syndrome, which is why we had to take the baby, had an emergency C-section. And so that was because I had long-standing hypertension before I even started this trying to conceive. And then on top of that, I was 230 pounds at that time, morbidly obese. I am 5'4", 230 pounds at that time. And I recall asking my fertility specialist, like, do you think I need to lose some weight before I really try this? Because there are some clinics out there that actually will not move forward if you're over a certain BMI. And so, I was kind of right there at the edge. And he told me, he's like, yeah, we'll do it. But of course, I'm going to tell you, losing weight is going to help you. Even 10% of weight loss is going to help you. And so at the time, I was like, but I'm racing against this clock. I'm getting older. I'm almost 40. No, I'm gonna just go ahead and proceed. I wish that I had taken the time to lose 10% at least of my body weight, because maybe I wouldn't have had the complications that I had during the pregnancy. Maybe, things would have been a whole lot smoother for me. Now, I did end up developing gestational diabetes, insulin resistance. I mean, I have PCOS, so I already
Of
knew
course.
that my insulin was not working well. And once I delivered, I actually inherited a diagnosis of diabetes. And it was actually an integrative OBGYN that diagnosed me. And so, at that time I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Diabetes? And but then I was like, no, this is real. I have a heavy family history on both sides of diabetes, and I really made some necessary changes. I did, and I lost 80 pounds at that time. I lost 80 pounds. I've gained a couple of it back, but I've been able to maintain pretty much for like the last almost 3 years. So, and I know a lot of women don't want to talk about the issue of lifestyle management and weight, particularly as it comes to infertility. But we know that obesity, morbid obesity, it's a disease. Number one, it's a disease. It's not doesn't make who you are. It's not an identifier. It's just a disease, and diseases have to be managed, and so it does need to be managed. It is a metabolic disorder, and that has so many other implications, not just in infertility, but the other thing I had to think about was, yeah, I can get through this fertility situation. I can conceive, hopefully have this baby, but I want to be around to actually raise my child and enjoy being a mother. So that means I'm going to have to lose some weight. I'm going to get my blood pressure under better control. And so that's what I did. And that's what I, talk to my clients about when they come to me. And we do talk about weight. In fact, our lifestyle, let me say that. In fact, that's actually one of my pillars to the framework that I've developed to help get clients through their fertility journeys. A major part of it is, let's just have the real conversation about your lifestyle. This is a safe space. You can talk to me about it, and let's talk about some strategies to really, help improve. Now, you also asked about toxins. Um, I too, when I was going through this, discovered or rediscovered, I guess, that a lot of the foods that we eat are just loaded with toxins, particularly the processed foods. But even the things that are grown, our farms are laden with pesticides that are toxins. And so you really do have to be careful about where you're sourcing your food. And, like I was telling you earlier, I'm from Georgia. I'm from South Georgia, and my family had a farm. And so I am used to getting fresh fruits and vegetables that my relatives grew on our farm. And we knew what was being put in the soil to help, fertilize and grow. So, I felt very comfortable about eating those foods. But now I actually absolutely have to, monitor what I'm eating, where it's coming from, all those things, or fix it myself, because I know
Yep.
what I'm putting in it. The other thing I did, I stopped using plastics to store my food and reheat it.
Yep.
Everything I store food in now is glass. And if it's reheated, I try to reheat that in the oven, not the microwave, if I can manage it. But if I need to heat it quickly, it's usually in the microwave in a glass container, not plastic, not paper, not styrofoam, none of that, because those chemicals, especially when you heat them, they will leach out into your food, and then you consume that, and then it becomes an endocrine disruptor. And that's where it relates to infertility. We, as I was talking about earlier, the whole process of going through any kind of ART, really is just an endocrine. You're just modulating your hormones. Essentially, you're manipulating them a bit. And so you certainly don't want to add to it by consuming or using products, foods that could be endocrine disruptors. So not only did I eliminate plastics and whatnot from our kitchen, also the utensils that I use, even to cook. Some of the non-stick cookware are not great for your health. Even the utensils that you might use, if they're plastic, non-stick, that's also not very great. Even the deodorant that I use, like I don't use the popular brands out here now because they contain things that um, could be seen as endocrine disruptors, and that's the
Mhm.
major thing. And one thing this reminds me of a conversation I had with an embryologist. Now, the embryologist is the one that's in the lab actually creating the magic. So she or he is taking that egg and that sperm and creating that embryo. And it is very common practice amongst embryologists to not wear those mainstream types of deodorants. She doesn't use any type of mainstream like detergent to launder her clothes. It's in vinegar. She washes her clothes in vinegar. She doesn't wear any type of perfume, anything like that. So if she doesn't do that, and she's like the one handling creating this magic for you, then it follows suit. Maybe I should do the same thing, and take some of those things out of my diet, out of my lifestyle, and really make some changes. Now, to what extent it helped me to conceive the first time, I don't know. But at that point, I was like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And that was a part of my routine. I did it, and my husband did it too.
Your transformation, your mental transformation is amazing. A couple thoughts. Going back to, we as physicians we're the same. We're human beings. We grew up here too, and so we're exposed to the things. So I talk a lot about how much we are being manipulated by big food and big pharma and all these people, because people are making money. It's our economy. It's the way it
Mm-hmm.
works. But the truth is that we are poisoning our people. We're poisoning ourselves, because obviously we're part of the problem. But we also get into those things where we as physicians, we have all this knowledge, but yet we fall into some of the same traps as well. And so I've had numerous people on the podcast with the way they came to integrative health or changing their thing. It was when they became very sick as
Mm-hmm.
physicians. I had one OBGYN, Christy Prouse, same thing. She became sick. She had a completely endocrine disruption, her hormones were a disaster, all this stuff, had complete burnout, and then
Mm-hmm.
kind of had to make massive changes and had to seek the right help, and had to do all these other things. I mean, there's other guys that had developed all these chronic diseases, and you know what they said? They said, I was actually following the guidelines that are set forth by our medical boards, and I was getting sicker. Some of that is because those guidelines are antiquated. We don't have to get into all that, but also we it's hard. If you look at like testosterone levels, what's happened to them over the decades,
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff, you hit it right on. It's the disruption. Those microplastics, they lodge in our mitochondria, all that stuff. And once it lodges in your mitochondria, it ain't going anywhere. There's no mechanism
Mm-hmm.
to pump it out. But I love your transformation. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm going to be presenting like later this year at this retreat. And somebody told me about what happened last time. So this retreat, the way it works is experts go there, and you give lectures, you do breakout sessions, you do this and that. And so obviously I'm going to talk about lifestyle medicine and all the stuff I was talking about. But somebody that presented there told me that it was mostly physicians, mostly providers. And the gist of it was, you wanted to go there to learn what to bring to your patients, but they end up being all the doctors have their own medical problems, and there's a lot of tears and breaking down and whatever. So most of the sessions, they're not asking
Wow.
questions about the patients. They're like, well, what can I do? I have this, I have that, I have diabetes, I've had a stroke, I have this, I can't deal with my LB, because
Wow.
we fall into those same traps. I loved your story
Yeah.
because you've made a big transformation, and
Mhm.
I love talking about wellness. And I can tell you, I have a lot of physician patients, now, and they're most of them are coming to me for spine, even though I'm doing the integrative thing now. I'm starting to see some of them on integrative, but on the spine side, they come to me and I start talking to them about their lifestyles, because I'm like, you're a
Mhm.
doctor, and yes, I'll take care of your back because you came to me, somebody said I should do your discectomy or whatever, but you're like 42 years old, you're hypertensive, you got all this stuff going. I was like, shouldn't we, like, what are you doing about it? And a lot of them, they're like, I don't have time for that, I got a busy practice. I was like, do you want to be a patient in the medical, do you want to be in the medical ICU, because that's where you're going to go? And so then it opens up the conversation. I try to keep it light, and then but it is funny because people think that, like, we don't fall into all the same, kind of, problems and issues that everybody else has. And it's pretty funny. So I'm just trying to get the message out to everybody. And I was always like this. I had to learn a lot of this stuff myself. We're not taught. I mean, to be honest, like,
Mm-mm.
listen, we went to different medical schools, and I know you would say that as far as nutrition, diet, exercise, what
Mhm.
did we have, 5 hours of
Mm-mm.
training?
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
But you know what? All those texts, we learned a lot of pharmacology, sponsored by whoever fill in the blank name. And again, I don't have, I'm not, sometimes people accuse me of being anti, drugs. I'm not. Drugs are amazing. A lot of these babies wouldn't be born if it wasn't for the,
Mhm.
for the drugs that we have, but they're wildly overused in medicine. And so are procedures and all kinds of stuff. And we need to get back to just wellness and helping people. And thank you. I'm glad I asked that question, because you are helping people with their lifestyles, and you can speak from experience. Look at what it's done
Yeah.
for your life, and now you're telling them, you know how powerful that is, if they're
Yeah.
there and they have some of the same issues, and then you're like, well, I struggled with that too. I had
Yep.
gestational diabetes, I had this, I had hyper, all that
Mhm.
stuff. And they're like, really? And so they're more open to doing it,
Mhm.
not wanting to kind of run out of the room because they don't want to hear it, because all they want to do is have a baby, and they don't
Right.
really care. They're like,
Exactly.
I can't change my
Exactly.
wellness, I just need a baby.
Exactly.
I just need a baby right now.
Yes.
So do you feel like, and so obviously you have a great story to tell your patients. Of the patients that you are approaching with making those lifestyle modifications and changes, are most people receptive? Because I'm finding, I was nervous at the beginning as a spine surgeon to start having very deep conversations about lifestyle changes. I thought I was going to get a lot of pushback. And I feel like at this point, I get almost no pushback when I just have
Mhm.
an honest conversation. I'm very authentic. I'm not judging you because you have this or you have that, or you let yourself go for 20 years. I'm not here for that. I'm here to be your partner and helping you. Do you feel like that you have a lot of
Yeah.
pushback, or do you feel like most patients are very open to it?
No, most of my clients are very open to the
Yep.
conversation, and I think it's several reasons why. But one of them is that, like, when they do go to their physician, they are on the clock in the sense that they got 15 minutes. That's not nearly enough time to have these kind of deep dive conversations with patients to really try to affect change. So, they leave the office and they're like, all right, well, I've got my prescription in hand. I've got my labs that I need to get done. But, like, I have no idea about how I'm going to move the needle with my chronic disease. Insert one. And so, as it relates to infertility, now my clients have, an avenue where they can access. Not only, am I a physician, but I'm also a person who understands it very intimately because I've been there and done that. And so now I can speak to them, and have those deep dive conversations and talk about the nuances of their lifestyle, their nutrition, their movement, what they're doing and not doing or could do better. I'm able to have those conversations. And so then when they go back to their reproductive endocrinologist and they're ready to move forward with IVF, IUI, whatever they choose, they're in a much better state of mind. Their bodies are much better and able to really go through this and go through it successfully. So, I don't have any proof of it, but I do feel like there are programs that are like mine that I'll offer to clients actually do increase the chances of conception when you're using ART. Absolutely.
I mean, we see that across the board.
Mhm.
People just do better.
Yeah.
We know it's crystal clear in the world of like spine surgery that if you are metabolically healthier, you're going to do better.
Mhm.
There's no question, right?
Mhm.
If you're even if you look pretty normal, but you have malnutrition of whatever sort, if you have
Mhm.
endocrine dysfunctions, all this stuff, that they don't do well. And so some of that's studied well, some of it's not. But there's no. I mean, I've been treating patients for a long time. It's crystal clear that those that come in healthy and have better lifestyles absolutely do better on the other end. The other
Mhm.
interesting thing, because I talk to physicians all the time about, because now that I've gone down this rabbit hole, I'm like excited about it, because I'm like, man, lives are changing just by lifestyle. You can change somebody's everything about them just by changing what they put in their mouth, what they expose
Yes.
themselves to, adding in meditation and other things to get them in a
Mhm.
parasympathetic state, and all the stuff.
Mhm.
But the pushback I get from providers, which is why I get pushback in like, yeah, I don't really want to broach the subject of their obesity or their poor health or whatever, because I'm this specialty, and then they're going to give me a bad review, which is then going to drop down my thing, and then I'm going to get called in. And so many people are afraid that not to offend anybody because of the reviews. But my pushback on that is, if you approach it authentically, like you're doing,
Right.
right? Or you're
Right.
just saying, or you just say, listen, I have to have this conversation with you. This is a difficult conversation. But sometimes people come in and I say, after we talk about their spine a little bit, I'm like, let's talk about your general health. I'm like, you're
Mhm.
35 years old. What's going on here? Like, when you were a little kid, did you ever think that you were going to become a sick 35-year-old
Mm.
or a non-mobile 50-year-old or whatever it is? And honestly, a lot of times people just start, like, the tears start going. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
I can't believe this is
Yeah.
awful. This is whatever. And that's, if you just break through authentically, and I try to tell my colleagues, I'm like, it's okay to have these. Ultimately, that's what we went to school for, to help
Yeah.
people, not just do a procedure and say, go to, okay, on to the next, like, just like that, not the Ford production line, right? We got to
Yeah.
help these people. But the pushback people get, and again, every market's different, so Atlanta might be different than Minnesota, but in Minnesota, like, there's a lot of these surveys that are done, especially by the employed physicians and
Yep.
hospital systems, and if they get a lot of pushback from people that are upset because they're implying that they're like trying to have a conversation about their obesity, it becomes difficult. I say we got to break those
Yeah.
barriers, and we just got to dive in there and have these conversations, because it's a life changer and a lifesaver. So we got to talk a little bit about the process of it, because
Yes.
otherwise people are like, you did a show with somebody that has brought joy to these families, and then you didn't even ask her about the process. You guys just started talking about like when people are thinking you're supposed to be cleaning the room and stuff like that. So on the
Yeah.
fertility front, before I have one other just curiosity question. Is it interesting, like physician to physician, have you found any issues with people, speaking of obesity, going on GLP-1 medications? Is there any contraindications when they're trying to go through a fertility program? Because I can tell you that in our community, they're pretty soon they're going to be putting GLP-1s in the water. That's how, like literally, like, you can get GLP-1s at the gym in our community. I'm not kidding. Well, there's a couple of franchises, and they just have like these wellness clinics, and they have providers that give out GLP-1s. We do it in our integrative health club, but we have a very, it's a big program, and it's diet, and we do like the body contouring, we do the like face rebuild. It's a very serious program. We put them on these powders to prevent. But anyway, since everybody's on GLP-1s, at least in our town, I don't know how it is in Atlanta, do you have to counsel these people that are trying to have babies that that's not a good drug for them? I just don't know.
Yes. So, and I can answer this question like again from a personal perspective. Like that is how I lost those 80 pounds was
Uh,
Ozempic. And so I started on Ozempic initially and then switched to Manjaro as soon as it hit the market. And that has helped me tremendously. Now, we do not know enough about these GLP-1s as far as, how it affects fertility.
mm,
And so what I always recommend, and I'm sure reproductive endocrinologists obviously do the same, before they go through any kind of cycle, stimulation cycle, we actually recommend to stop taking the medication for a good 2, 3 months.
that's interesting. And then you get all the problems of the GLP-1 withdrawals, because some people like
Mm-hmm.
regain all the weight back, and they
Mm-hmm.
have the other stress. The other aspect, because I was asking it in the negative way, but yet if you're taking GLP-1s, and we know in some people, especially if they're diabetic, which was obviously the original intention of the whole thing, what is better, to get them metabolically better as far as their diabetes, or does the GLP-1s? Because one of the things, I had an expert on who's one of the leading pharmacologists in the world, and he talked about his concern long term for the GLP-1s. And that's why we don't know what it affects. So the question is, like, for example, the pleasure reward center of the brain, because it's going to affect the way that dopamine is produced from the serotonin pathway. It's like he's just worried we just don't know enough. What if somebody's on a GLP-1 for 7, 8 years, like what's that going to do to the way that their pleasure reward? Is it going to dull it? Are we going to start seeing more
Mm.
suicidal ideation and depression and things like that? And he's actually written
Mm.
extensively to the FDA and all these people. This guy is like, he's one of these guys in the 80s that we talked about. He is so well published. His name is Kenneth Bloom. He's brilliant. He has more energy than I do. He's like, I think he's turning 85 years old now. I mean, he's just a brilliant guy. But it's just interesting because as physicians, and I think I did a post on this like 6 months ago, I was like, I want to learn everything I can about GLP-1s
Yeah.
because they're so ubiquitous. We need to know what they're
Yeah.
doing to all the organ
Absolutely.
systems, not just, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, you lose weight. Now what's it doing to, like,
Uh-huh.
what is it doing to your kidneys? What's it doing to your liver? What's it doing
Yep.
to stuff? Because
Yep.
everything's connected to everything else. So yeah, that was great. That was great.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. No, we definitely talk about that for sure. Yeah.
I think the best way to do this is because obviously our audience, a lot of them, there's a lot of physicians stuff, but a lot of them are lay audience. So I'm just going to start from this. I mean, I'm over 50 now, but let's just say that me and we're well past that. But let's say I come in with my wife and we wanted to have, we're both, we're well past that point. But let's say we wanted to have it and we were struggling.
Yeah.
What's the first
Yes.
thing? Like, what's the first step? Like, how does that process work? Like I said, I was so busy in my practice. I hope I was a
It's
good enough
okay.
husband, but I missed a lot of those visits because I was too stressed with my practice at the time.
Yeah, no, it's a great question because a lot of people actually present to the reproductive endocrinologist when it's almost too late.
Mm,
So it is important to really kind of talk about, well, when do I know that I need to
yes.
even go see a fertility specialist? So, what we typically say is that at least for women, around the age 35 is when, production of quality eggs drops. So, and almost, quickly drops around 35. And so your ideal time to go to the physician to kind of talk about your fertility is certainly before then. The sooner the better, especially if you realize that you're having problems. So what does that look like for a couple who's trying to conceive? So typically if you're over age 35 and you've tried in earnest for 6 months without success, you need to go see the specialist.
Okay.
If you're less than 35 and you've been trying at least a year and not have any success, after that year, you need to go see the fertility specialist. Now, those are the general guidelines, but I always say, if you recognize that there is a serious problem before that 6 month or 1 year period, go see at least your OB. so that, a basic workup can be started to kind of look into what's going on with you and your fertility issues. And if they find that there are some concerns that, you need to see a specialist, then get to that reproductive endocrinologist as soon as you can. Because again, 35 and older, egg quality just really, really drops. And, one thing important to note, as women, you are born with all of the eggs you're going to ever have. And in fact, in utero is when you have the most, but you're going to be born with all the eggs you'll ever have. And essentially, they start dwindling once you start puberty. And you don't lose just one, per month. You lose several eggs each month that you have a menstrual cycle. So they just don't all survive. And then the quality of those eggs that remain actually diminishes as well. So not only do you have less, but then the egg quality is not the best either, the older you get. So you decide, okay, we're going to go see the fertility specialist and have a consultation. That physician is going to want to know a lot about your reproductive history, and including your menstrual cycles. If you're a woman, and your partner, they're going to test their sperm to look at not just the number of sperm that's there, but try to get a sense of what the morphology of those sperm look like. And then once they get all of that baseline information, of course, they're going to make sure your uterus is clear. There are no fibroids, no endometriosis, nothing like that could impede implantation of the embryo. So, and then they're going to want to make sure your fallopian tubes are open. There's no scarring, all of that. They'll do all those testing. And a lot of that is done through ultrasound imaging and blood work as well. We kind of look at your hormones, where they are. Particularly, we're looking at FSH, we're looking at LH, we're looking at your estrogen levels as well. So once a fertility specialist has all of that information in hand, and you know that you want to proceed, then you usually have a protocol that's developed for you. And you get that information, you decide on when you're going to start your egg stimulation, and if you need to do that, and then you go through that process. Now, the process of egg stimulation usually, well, at least for me, it was about 10 days. I think almost 14 for me, because I had to go a little bit longer because I was not responding to the medication. So, you just expect that you're going to have to kind of give yourself injections for that period of time. And along the way, you're going into the doctor to have frequent visits to look at your eggs as they are developing by ultrasound. And then they're also testing your hormones in your blood to see if you're responding to the medications. And so once they decide, okay, we've got X number of eggs, they look pretty good, let's go ahead and harvest these eggs. And this is a very, very careful balance that the fertility specialist has to make, because you don't want to overstimulate the ovaries, because then you'll have problems from that. But then you also want to make sure you're giving the ovaries time to really develop and those eggs that are there, so they can be used, to create embryos. So once it's decided that you're ready to harvest those eggs, you would give yourself what we call a trigger shot. So basically saying to your body, okay, now it's time to release these eggs. And the physician will go in, sometimes 48, 72 hours later, and remove those eggs. And they're immediately handed off to the embryologist. Once the embryologist has those eggs and they have the sperm, they immediately fertilize them, and they start their process of making sure that the embryo continues to grow. Now, some people do what we call like a fresh embryo transfer, in the sense that, okay, the egg is harvested right then, fertilized, and then transferred back into the uterus same day. But the research has shown that frozen embryo transfer actually is pretty good, and so you would then allow the embryo to grow around day 5, day 6. Again, the embryologist is looking at them every day to let you know how many actually fertilized, how many actually survived to day 5. And if you'd like, you can also get genetic testing on those embryos. And so they take a portion of that embryo and send it off to the lab. And you're able to kind of get really basic information. You're not really able to kind of deep dive and talk about, any genetic disorders, metabolic disorders. You're not able to really gauge that from this level of testing. But you are able to kind of see, is it a boy? Is it a girl? Is it a euploid embryo? Is it a mosaic embryo? What's the grading of this embryo? So that you can make better decisions with your doctor about which embryos to try to transfer. So once you get that information, you have that conversation with your doctor. And this is also, again, where having a physician, a strategist, and coach, a consultant like me is helpful, because you're like, okay, what do I do with all this information? Help me, figure out what's going to make the most sense for our family. But that's where I come in and kind of help along this entire journey. And so once you've decided, then there's another set of medications that you have to take in order to prepare for transfer. And essentially, you're just saying to your body, okay, now we're ready to get pregnant. And you're giving yourself hormones as though you were. And so you go in on transfer day. The embryo is handed off from the embryologist to the physician. I was able to see right where the physician put the embryo in my uterus, and that was that. I got up off the table pregnant. And now for me, I actually I did acupuncture during the entire procedure, like even the lead up to it, like at least for about 6-7 months, and I really loved it. But my acupuncturist actually came to the clinic, and just after I had my transfer, she did. We had a session together in the room. So it was very, very helpful for me to, and I was so grateful that my clinic allowed me to kind of bring that medicine in, and it was helpful, very helpful for me. So that's the long and short of it. And then once you're pregnant, there's this 2-week wait that all women who are going through this despise, because they tell you don't take any pregnancy tests at home, wait until that 2-week time frame, come on in, we'll draw your blood, confirm your beta HCG levels, and then you just continue doing that with your reproductive endocrinologist, and you graduate, quote unquote, from the reproductive endocrinology office when you're around towards the end of the first trimester. And then you go back to your OB to continue the rest of the pregnancy. So that's pretty much what happened to me. One of the other, I guess I shouldn't call this highlight, but one of the other highlights or things that you should be prepared for is, during that time when you're about to transfer the embryo, you do have to start on progesterone as a medication. It's given either as a vaginal suppository or an injection. And so my doctor recommended the injection for me. And so that meant that I had to have progesterone injections every night around the same time from before transfer until around like 9 or 10 weeks of pregnancy. And my husband was the one that administered the injections. I'm not going to even lie, it hurt. I felt like I was a pincushion, but it's what I needed to do in order to sustain the pregnancy, and that's what we did. So, I mean, I often carried around my medications with me. If I was out and about, even as a physician, like I knew some of my colleagues would understand it, but I still didn't want it to be like completely obvious that I'm in here like injecting myself with medicine. So, and I carry a little special bag with me all the time, and that's where my medicine was. Even going to the fertility specialist, like initially I was ashamed to even show up, because I was like, what if I run into somebody I know? and they're looking at me like, what are you doing here? And so, there's this shame that you feel, this guilt kind of that you feel about it as a woman, particularly because, that's what you were designed to do, is to create new life. And now someone's telling you can't. So you feel kind of less than a woman sometimes. And so I would show up at the fertility specialist office in a hoodie with sunglasses on, like trying to avoid eye contact with people. And one day I actually did run into somebody that I know, and I was like, hey. They had the same expression too. But I had to learn to actually get over that, because again, this is so common and there's so many people that are going through it, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And going back to something I said earlier, as far as previous generations, this is not something that, you sit around the Thanksgiving table and talk about with your family. Like, I mean, my grandmother had 9 children. So, this never came up. And as far as I know, my aunts didn't have any problems with this either. And so here I am, the first person in the family to openly admit that I'm using IVF to conceive. And people are like, wait, what? Why don't you, pray about it? That's what we say in the South. Why don't you just relax, just, relieve the stress? I'm like, no, that is not what we're going to do. Yes, we're going to do some of that stress relief, but we're also going to do some other things to make some things happen. And that's what we decided to do. And ultimately, my family accepted it. They were totally understanding of it, very supportive once we explained everything to them. And so that, that's the long and short of, what to expect, when you decide you need to go to see the reproductive endocrinologist and go through something like IVF.
I'm going to start with some interesting thing. Now, you say with the other generations, maybe, again, this is anecdotal and this is me talking about like all the changes that have happened. Maybe the reason people weren't having trouble having children in those other generations were because they weren't being poisoned all day long, which is absolutely what's happening every time we open up one. I mean, there's all these funny posts online. They're funny, but they're not funny. This one guy, this chef, I mean, he looked at the ingredient. He's like, it was just a cake. This is like a shortcake. And he's like, why are there, 70 ingredients in the cake? He's like, there should be 4. I'm a chef. And he just throws it in the garbage. He's like, this is garbage. Eating that stuff all over. You talk about endocrine disruption. No wonder. And it'd be interesting. I don't know how the fertility rates changed or how well we were looking at fertility rates in 1940. I don't know, but yeah. I'm assuming that probably more. I don't know if it wasn't on the radar or if people couldn't have kids. They didn't tell them. I don't know, but it brings up that you got to ask that question. Why are testosterone rates so low? Why are sperm counts so low? Why are people having so much difficulty, having, children? So on that, like, what is the success rate? Is the success rate? Is it tiered by age? Is it like you're 35, your chances is 60%, and then when you're 36, it goes to 56%? Like, what are the general ranges of that? Because
yes,
people are going to want to know, like, what happens if you're 42? Is that it? Is it game over?
It's hard to say. Okay, if you're 42, you're going to be have this percentage of success, and it's not going to work for you if you're 40. It is, nobody can really say that. It's hard to do those absolutes, really, because are there 42-year-old women who conceive via IVF successfully and go on to have healthy pregnancies? Yes. Maybe there's another 42-year-old woman that goes through this and they actually don't end up conceiving for other reasons. So yes, that does happen. One of the things that I looked at when I was trying to decide which clinic to go to was looking at their data, the clinic's data, as far as the percentage of live births that they have. How many people in my age group have they treated successfully? All those things. I looked at the embryology lab. Who was the embryologist there? What was their experience? And so all of those are key factors that I always recommend that my clients think about and talk about with their physician. And so once I, kind of got that information, and by the way, the CDC actually does publish information about this. every year. So you can actually go look up the clinic you're interested in, and kind of see what their numbers are.
Excellent.
Of course, they're kind of behind, they're delayed in the reporting by a year or two. But most of that information is accurate, and doesn't really change as much unless the technology changes and gets better. Then of course people's success rates should, in theory, go up. But um, when I visited my physician, we did talk about the rate of attrition, so that she gave me so I could have the correct expectation. This wasn't a type, and for most women, it's not a one and done. It's not a we're going to try this one time and it's going to be successful that first time. That's usually not the case. I have had clients to go through upwards of 6 or 7 cycles before they come to me, and then we do this program, the framework that I have, and then they're able to conceive. So I mean, it's so multifactorial. It really is. And but the best thing that I always say to my patient or my clients that come to me with this, and you said it earlier, make sure that you're in the best metabolic shape that you can be in before you start this process, because not only are we concerned about the conception via IVF, we want to make sure we've created the right environment for that to happen successfully, but we also want to create the best environment for that embryo to now develop and grow in being a baby. And then, so that you can have a healthy pregnancy, a healthy baby, a healthy delivery. Like, all of that is so important, and it starts well before you even think you might want to try to have a baby. It starts now, and you have to make those changes now.
That's great. I mean, this is great advice for people that just don't know, and you're right, there is a stigma. Isn't it's funny because as physicians, like, we don't want people to know when we're sick or we got something going on, right? It becomes a big secret because we're physicians that are out here saying this stuff, but yet we don't want to talk about our own things because we feel like people are going to think we're less than, or what's wrong with you, or whatever. And that happens obviously with any chronic health condition. But yeah, it's funny that you're going incognito in your in your thing, like you're some international hacker that Interpol is looking for. That's pretty, I like that. And then you run into somebody else and you're like, oh, you're here too, how you doing?
Yeah,
So,
hey. Try not to make eye contact.
Exactly, because I share those feelings too. I don't want to, but I want to make it a point, because I preach so much of this stuff, that if I'm dealing with stuff, I'm just going to talk about it openly. I don't want to be that guy that has to tell everybody everything that happens in their life on social media. But I do appreciate it when physicians come on and share that they're going through a cancer process and how they're handling their keep, because that is so helpful to people, because it shows that we're going through it too. We're scared too. We want stuff. And I know that when you said that, it kind of stressed me out, because when you do the IVF, which is different, and once that embryo's in there, it's not like you're like, oh, we're good, we'll see at 9 months. Every day, not only are you doing the injections, but you're also like, am I still pregnant? Am I still pregnant? Am I still pregnant? You're probably not thinking about anything else. So the stress level it's not like it's one day, we'll check you in 2 weeks, and you're completely calm and relaxed for those 2 weeks. You're stressed. You're stressing. Yes. I'm sure your husband was stressed. Everybody's stressed.
Yes, everybody was stressed. Any little sign or symptom that I had, I was like, what does that mean? Let me go to Google. Yeah. What does it say? I mean, let me go to these Facebook groups that I'm in about women who are suffering from infertility. What is everybody saying? And then my husband will tell you this, but like, I made him one day go out and buy as many pregnancy tests as he could get his hands on. And I know they told me not to do it, but I was like, I gotta know. And so I used one of them, and I didn't see anything. And I was like, oh man. And so now there's that stress, like, man, I'm not pregnant. It didn't work. And what am I going to do next? And so I kept taking the test. And then one day I actually looked back on it. And I was like, oh yeah, I do see a line there. And so it was subsequently confirmed, and we went from there. But again, I was an older mom at that time. geriatric pregnancy, I guess is what they call it, or advanced maternal age, whatever they call it. But anyway, I was already on pins and needles because this was an IVF pregnancy, but then also my age on top of it, and that I was not well. I was 230 pounds and 5 feet 4 inches with chronic hypertension and gestational diabetes. I was not healthy and I was on pins and needles the entire pregnancy, the entire pregnancy. And then, oh, throw in COVID. And I'm a frontline provider. We saw a lot of kids with COVID. And so it was an
Listen,
interesting time of life.
whenever the COVID topic comes up now, as I'm doing this show, honestly, we could talk about that for 2 more hours. At PTSD from everything we saw. I mean, these poor female. I mean, people dying. They can't even see their family.
Yep.
I had, and we didn't. First of all, obviously, whenever anything that chaotic happens, it never gets handled well. I mean, the humans have a good. We know, like if it just it's not the same, but it rhymes, right? So we just didn't handle it well. But I think the way we handled it in healthcare, the social isolation that we created in
Yes.
so many senses, and it wasn't right, because I know, like, a good friend of mine got COVID, and the doctor would not even come into the room to examine them. They actually did it through, and they were in a rural hospital somewhere up north in Minnesota. I'm not gonna whatever, but this actually happened. And we stigmatized people, and all this stuff happened. So the COVID thing was, but I know, a friend of mine too, both of his parents died from COVID. They were in their 90s, and so they were the people that went first. And the social isolation really was devastating to them, because people didn't want to go see them because they were sick, and you weren't supposed to see them, and spread it around. So sorry, but you bring up a PTSD.
No,
I
and
feel
that's
like
what it
you're my,
is.
that's why I love talking to people like you, because you just have a great personality. So all of a sudden you become my psychiatrist on this thing, and I'm like, I got to tell you, I'm not over the whole COVID thing, because we
Me
had missteps,
either.
and I hope that never happens again. And I hope that
Me too.
we maintain more of our humanity, and just make decisions in a better, more logical way, and get rid of the politics. There was the politicization of COVID at the time really hurt us. It made, in
Yeah.
retrospect, it really makes zero sense. Oh, you're on this side, you're on that. What does that have to do
Hmm.
with a global pandemic that's killing all these
Yeah.
people?
I was about to say, meanwhile, people are dying. So, I
Meanwhile,
mean,
people are dying,
yeah.
and we're like, what's your political party? What's your, oh, I'm this, I'm this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do all that stuff. Kind of the last thing I just want to kind of wrap, and I appreciate you being on for long. I mean, this has gone on, and we could go on for hours, right? And we could talk about
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff. Love to have you back at some point. But
Absolutely.
one of the things that I'm passionate about is improving people's metabolic health. And so we talked about the lifestyle, but the other thing that we do a lot of, other than the hormonal management and all that stuff, and you guys obviously know what you're doing on that front, that's what you do, but we do a lot of this biohacking. So I'm very curious to see how biohacking, because for example, red light therapy, we use a lot of this photobiomodulation, red light and green light therapy, for all kinds of chronic diseases now. And I didn't know anything about this a couple of years ago. I've become an expert in photobiomodulation, and now we have people, we'll call them clients, in our wellness centers, and patients in our in our medical clinic, like the integrative health clinic. But we are people that have things like lupus, and they have rheumatoid, and they have all these metabolic issues. They're doing really well with these biohacking technologies that are out here, oxygen therapy, delivering oxygen through EWAT, exercise while under oxygen, or hyperbaric oxygen chamber, and light. What is interesting, and I know that and this is, I'm not going to put you on the spot, because I know that this isn't big yet, but there is research being done, and there are some clinics, fertility clinics, both for men and female, that are treating the ovaries and the uterus, and they're treating the testicles with light and laser therapy, And so for like in some of the research, again, I don't go, it's not my area of expertise. And one of the docs that help us to found these clinics, he's a physical medicine rehabilitation specialist. He got all excited because he saw all these articles about increasing sperm counts with light therapy. I said, we're not going to, I mean, there are ranges of things we're going to do. We're not getting into fertility. That is such a specific niche. It's different. I'm happy to do all kinds of chronic disease and all kinds of other stuff where there's other people involved. But when I do, but it's interesting to see how some of this biohacking stuff is going to play into improving. I know it can improve metabolic health. So I think, like, I would tell people, like, before this to do all this stuff and just get their metabolic health better. But it'd be interesting to see if fertility rates can be increased by treating them with some of this red light stuff, some of this laser stuff, even transvaginal stuff. I don't know, because they are starting to use, like, even like for bladder stuff, like you can put a thing up there and treat with light therapy in the bladder wall for like interstitial cystitis, which is a disaster, right? For these women that have it, it completely ruins your life, right? So I'm just interested and fascinated in these worlds and how we can take things that are non-traditional, like yourself doing acupuncture during the whole thing. I'm a huge believer in acupuncture. I think everybody should be doing acupuncture. All this, I mean, come on, Chinese medicine. I think they might know something. They've been doing it for 5,000 years.
So.
Maybe
Yeah.
don't blow it off. I think it works. Right. So I just threw that out there. Not that because I know that you're that's not what you do. But what I do want to ask you, and I don't know if you know, and I certainly don't know, but I'm going to research it right after we're done with this podcast, because it just came up. Some things come up, and we neither of us have researched it. But it's interesting, the way that light therapy works is it is absorbed in the mitochondria, and then the mitochondria work better, help to produce ATP, and then it improves cellular function. So obviously, like mitochondria are going to be affecting the way, like the sperm, like the sperms kind of swim around, that kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting to know if not only they can increase sperm counts, but if they can improve mobility, right? Because that's a big issue, right, in fertility. But I'd be curious to know, kind of like, I don't know, just because I haven't studied them. I've studied a lot on mitochondria, but not specifically on, for example, the egg. I don't know how mitochondria, correlate with egg health. And I can't help it, because this is the way my brain works. So we're talking about stuff that's not in my lane. And now I'm like, hey, maybe some of the things we're doing can help to, can help in those other fields. I don't know if you know anything about that stuff.
I don't, but when you think about it, it's just from a basic, like, scientific biology kind of level. I mean, why wouldn't it help? Now, of course, we're born with all the eggs we're going to have, and the DNA contained in those eggs are very fragile. And so, we also know that as you get older, the egg quality does go down. And, so could we effectively make a change in egg quality for women, especially those that are over that 35-year-old mark, but still want to have children? And I think that's something that needs to be explored, because a lot of women in modern society are delaying starting families because of their careers. They want to do that first. And so this would make sense, theoretically, but, of course, somebody needs to, study it and, really design a great study around it to see if it's actually going to move the needle and make a difference.
Yeah, when I'm going to do a little bit of digging, because I know they're out there, and I know that I've been sent a bunch of things on fertility with photobiomodulation. I'll pull some of that stuff. I'm gonna send it to you, because I'm curious.
Please share it.
I'm very curious to know. But it's like, before we got in, because we do a lot of brain treatments for either psychiatric stuff or for, like, especially for concussion, PTSD, but like early Alzheimer's and even Parkinson's. And we know that if you shine a light, not a lot of it gets through the cortex. Like if you just do LED, it's 3%. It's higher when you do laser, but it creates synaptogenesis where like the synapses actually regrow. It's incredible. I mean, it is amazing. I never heard of any of these things. And so we're treating TBI patients, we're treating early onset. And we know that if you shine the light on the brain right away, a functional MRI shows increased blood flow. And all these things happen, and people do better on cognitive tests by doing and we do this all the time. I mean, it's a standard protocol. So
Wow.
that and a lot of it is because it's affecting, the density of the mitochondria and the neurons is very high. So I don't know what the density would be in there, and I would imagine it's pretty high in like the sperm. I don't know much about the egg. I'm just throwing out there just because it's a motil. The thing's wagging around. It's got that's obviously power. That's ATP
Yep.
driving it. So it'd be interesting to know like what the effects would be. And again, I'm going to do, some more digging on this, and maybe we can chat about that. Who knows? Next time we
Mm-hmm.
talk, you might be like, you know what? I am recommending light therapy on every single patient that is having trouble conceiving, and that might be part of the solution. Again, if we have low cost things that people can do to improve their health, it's
Yeah.
great. Light therapy is very low cost as opposed to the last question that I have for you, and that's the finance. Because you talked about people doing 7 cycles, and with all, I'm apolitical, so we're not going to go down that road. But with all this talk now, where it seems like both political parties are kind of in favor of making it kind of available to people through insurance. So what's the state of the state? How much would it cost for a cycle?
Uh,
And where are we going with this in our country right now?
yeah, no, I'm glad you asked the question because, it is one of those things that people get sticker shock about when they go see the specialist and get that consult. So on average, one cycle could be around ten to $20,000. Now, not every major insurance carrier covers it. It really depends on your employer and what they have negotiated with the carriers to provide. So we were blessed at that time that while I didn't have coverage with my insurance, my husband did. Now, of course, there's varying levels of coverage. We did have a certain dollar amount that was allocated towards the actual procedure itself, and then some towards the medication, because that arguably is the most expensive part of this is the medicine. And so, but we did have to come out of pocket for certain procedures. And then because I had to do a longer egg stimulation, I did have to pay for some of those drugs that were outside of the insurance covering it. So now, but that didn't, it wasn't easy, in the very beginning because we started with one clinic and we got approved, the insurance is going to cover it, but then we switched and they resubmitted our information and then the insurance company denied it. So we were looking at, giving a good $20,000 up front because, that's what the clinic's policy was. You got to pay us up front. And so while I was in the process of appealing the insurance company's decision, we did have to pay that money, but ultimately they did reimburse us a portion of it because the insurance did change their decision and they decided to cover me. But that's not everybody's case. Now, there are some employers that do provide coverage, like Starbucks comes to mind. They're a company that will provide coverage for IVF. It's not widespread, but there are more employers that are doing this. There are some states that actually do mandate that employers provide some insurance coverage. There are some, but not all. And I do think we're headed in that direction as a country that more and more employers are going to provide coverage to families who choose to build their families in this way. It really is, it should be a right for someone to have if they so choose to. And so I do think that's where we're headed. Now, there, of course, have been in the media and on a national stage in 2024 regarding personhood of embryos. And that is still probably going to be a hot topic as people kind of sort that out. But, you know, I have different opinions about it. You know, there's so many sides of it to be looked at. Yeah, and I actually did a podcast with a friend of mine who's a reproductive endocrinologist, and we were talking about the implications of this, not just from the patient standpoint, but also from the physician standpoint. You know, none of us went into medicine to become criminals. And especially when all we're trying to do is to help people and to do no harm, the last thing you want to think about is somebody calling you a criminal because of the decision that you and your patient made together to do. And, you know, it's one of those things, especially when it comes to reproduction, it's so intimate and personal. It really should be a decision that you've made with your doctor and whatever support systems that you have around you to decide what to do, not a government telling you what you need to do.
I mean, ultimately, it is. I mean, that is a fascinating topic, right? Because you're creating embryos. You're not necessarily going to use, you know, it's tough. Yet when you
It's
are in that,
nuanced. Yeah.
but if you're in that position where you want to have that thing, and I certainly know, I mean, we know families that have given. Actually, my cousin, she was in her 40s, my cousin. Nobody thought, even the people that were doing the IVF told her, you're wasting your money.
Yeah.
And she has he is now, I think he's like 12 years old. Great kid. It's just one of those things, but it's different when it's you. It's just such a complicated issue. But then you think about it on the other side. Again, I'm not taking stances. I'm not doing anything. This isn't a religious thing, and it's not
Agreed.
it's not to do with that. But think about how many embryos are conceived that never go anywhere. Think about how many embryos are conceived that nobody's ever known about. How about billions?
And even
Billions.
in the human body, I mean, you
Yeah, that's
know,
what I'm saying. No, I'm saying
yeah,
they're conceived. How many people get, but then it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, that's normal. And we always talk about people that unfortunately they have miscarriages. But yeah, how many miscarriages happen that you had no clue
yes,
because it's so early on because they can't
yes,
implant or whatever.
yes.
And so it's just such an ethical issue. But it's fun. My son, my 16-year-old, he's on the debate team, so he loves this topic. Would never be. He goes to a Christian school, so there's a
Oh, yeah.
0% chance. You don't want to be debating IVF, and the people would be, it's just that. And obviously people would take different sides of it, but what an amazing thing to bring to a debate stage, like talking about this just from a debate exercise. I'm not just saying, and I do agree with you, I think it's completely personal. And people that are harsh towards IVF, when it's you and you can't have a child and that's all you've ever wanted and you've dreamed about that since you were either a little girl or a little boy, because a lot of the males involved too are just as wanting of that child as everybody wants the child. It's just different. So I encourage people to put themselves in that person's shoes and then think about, if it was them, and really think about it, like how would they process that, instead of, again, going back to what we're saying, all this judgment stuff. And I want to get away from that. It's like, how do we just have a good society where people are just happy and we can all be, our best selves, and do that kind of stuff. The only other thing that, if I wanted to throw something on, my only worry down the road, where this technology is getting better, right? The ability to manipulate and build the embryo. I always remember When I was in med school, the most frightening thing I heard, I remember I was bothered by it by like a week. I don't know why. I started thinking of all this dystopian stuff, was that hamster experiment where they fertilized the human egg with with the hamster, and they called it the hamster experiment, and it just started growing. And so with some of the rival nations, I don't name names, but there's some places where their ethics is it's not. Listen, not that we're not squeaky clean. America does plenty of stuff. Again, I talk about how we're poisoning our kids. So we maybe we shouldn't be the ones that are making these things. But I do worry about down the road. And you said it before, like being able to start doing IVF and then choosing color of the eyes and the
Hmm.
intellect and the other
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
When are we then playing God? Or for those
Right.
that are non-believers, it doesn't matter. You can, if you don't want to call it God, you say whatever. When are we outside the bounds of what we should be doing, or when are we creating like literally a disaster and
Yep.
just changing all of humanity? If the robots don't, if we don't all become AIs and robots first when they take over. So it's like, what's going to happen first? Do we break the ethical barrier and just go crazy and start creating new species and stuff like that, which maybe we shouldn't? Or does the AI take over? Have you thought about it all? Like with like
Yeah.
some of
Oh,
the
yeah.
experimentation that's being done in
Yeah.
I don't mean this stuff. You're doing bread and butter stuff with your families. I'm 100% supportive, and I think again, I think most families, if they're struggling, listen, I'm adopted, so I'm going to be a big proponent of adoption, and I try to help people on that front and all that. But I know I have my own like biological children. It's amazing. It's a beautiful thing, and
Yeah.
if you want that, you should be able to get that. But have you thought about how bad it can get if people just start deciding that we're going to just start making these like superhumans that have no genetic mutations and are perfect and are the smartest people and
Yep.
all the features we don't like? Like I said, I don't really like
Hmm.
exactly like my nose or the way my chin
Hmm.
looks, so I don't want my kid to
Hmm.
have that. So go ahead and CRISPR that away,
Yeah. I
and
mean,
do something with
you know,
that.
as with any, the technology that's, really, seeing a rise, I always get concerned about it being in the wrong hands. And what we could inadvertently be doing with still maybe with good intentions, but still creating this monster that's going to be hard to contain. And so, yeah, I do think about it. And, I think there are people in the world that really think about that too and try to think forward about, okay, what kind of regulatory things do we need to put in place around this? What kind of guardrails do we need to place around this to make sure this type of thing doesn't happen?
Amazing talking to you. And yeah, if we go down an ethical
Hey.
discussion, now that's my cup of tea. I could talk about that. My younger son, he's into all this stuff. Man, the debates we have in our house, seriously, we had this one debate. I'm not going to tell people what it was, a pretty controversial thing. He loves to talk about controversial things. 4 hours. Eventually, literally, him and my wife were still going. I'm like, you know what? I tapped out. I was like, I got to work tomorrow. You guys figure it out. But he will never back down, no matter how many points, because it was me and my wife tag teaming him. He would not back down. I was like,
It's
your
going to be a
mother
great
is
attorney,
exactly
maybe.
right.
You know,
Oh, and she's an
yeah.
attorney. So I was like, clearly you're my older son, he's going to do pre-med at Bowdoin, next year. So it's like he'll go that way, and the younger one, I'm like, medicine's you go argue. He just wants to argue with people. So I was like, that's just fine. So anyway, listen, this has been a great thing. I think that just people that watch this, they're going to have so much help just from your own personal story and what you've had to overcome from your, like from the medical things, and then how you translate that into your empathy with patients, being there with them, the having successful, pregnancies for these people. It really changed their lives, right? You changed the entire trajectory of their life and their family tree. So it's really interesting stuff. And wish I had more time to talk about like the controversial,
Yeah.
really fun stuff. No UFO stuff
Well, that's
or the
part two.
drones. Or the
Right, right, right,
drones. Maybe we'll do the
right.
drones. The drones is a kind of a fun topic right now. So I hope everyone really like, Watch this till the end. Dr. McCarthy's been great. Loved having her on the program. Thank you so much for being on, and we'll definitely see you next time. Thanks, everybody, for being on another episode of Wellness at the Speed of Light. We will see you on the next show.